So, hi everyone. I hope you are all doing well. So today, actually, I want to discuss what different ways are to define democracy, how to categorize democracies, like based on their primary institutional orientations, and what kind of criterion that we can use. Okay, so we have three goals here. So let's start with how to define democracy. Actually, democracy is a contested concept. So in each concept in social sciences or in political life, we can come up with a textbook definition, like kind of a very fancy, very short, very concise definition. But please be aware that such definitions always carry their own biases, okay? Their own power processes. We should always be critically examine any definition. Today we are discussing two broad ways to define democracy. The first one is what we call procedural definition of democracy, which simply means that democracy is defined as the political system relying upon the presence of free, fair, and regular elections. So these are very intuitive elements, right? So regular, it means that there should be an election schedule, okay? Sometimes there can be early elections like snap elections, blah blah, but there should be universally accessible. Everyone should be having the knowledge, information about when the next election will be held, okay? And fair, which simply means that it will be the right to participate, and also the resources of different political parties will have access to organize their campaigns, their ability to find space in the media, blah blah blah. So all the resources to participate in elections should be fairly distributed, which simply means they should be equally distributed or equitably distributed among stakeholders. And free, which simply means that everyone or every adult, to be honest, should be free to enjoy their voting rights, their right to participate in democratic elections, okay? So there are definitely many restrictions and many exceptions and many failures of this definition, such as they say in universally. Can people younger than 18 vote? No. In many places, in most places, no. Which means that the system isn't free for the participation of younger population. It's an important issue. Can non-human animals participate? No. We generally don't ask what a horse thinks. So which simply means that it is not free for them to participate. Okay. Let's say in United States, there are many felon disenfranchisement laws. So at least a few million people are disenfranchised, cannot enjoy, exercise their fundamental right to vote, which mitigates democratic quality of a system. So there are many exceptions like this, and this is pretty normal. This is pretty normal in the sense that in the social sciences, in the political science, we try to come up with an ideal type definition of our concept, which simply means that our definition will be pointing out something which doesn't exist out there. We are trying to describe an ideal that's existing, empirical, present forms can only approximate. We can evaluate their success or failure or their score of democracy based on how they approximate to this ideal construct, okay? So this is procedural definition of democracy. So this is very simple, right? So to codify a country as a democratic or not, you can look at their elections, the rules, governing the elections, regulating the elections or electoral systems, party laws, voter identification laws, election laws. These information are all public. You can easily codify. But this definition actually isn't very satisfactory for everyone, okay? for understandable reasons, because this definition doesn't care about what type of goods or services or rights that this system is promising to deliver. Okay, this definition isn't interested in the output or performance or the outcomes of democratic processes. So just based on having a free, fair, and regular elections, you can create or lead to the emergence of the most unequal, like economically unequal polity in the world. Okay, so some people, some scholars actually question that whether we should come up with like other list of aspects and features that a democratic system should have in order to deserve this qualification. And these are mostly about the performance, like outputs, like are there like political equalities? Are there economic equalities? Are there social equalities? Are there gender equalities? Are there racial equalities? So all of these substantive goods, services, and rights should be accompanied for a system to reclaim this identity or status of being a democracy. So there are two ways, just repeating. Procedural, look mostly at whether they have free, fair, and regular elections, but substantive definition of democracy like is like they are coming with much more demanding criteria. Okay, and it is more subjective, or it is hard to codify a country as a democracy or not, because like all of these substantive elements like carry their own subjective like evaluations. Okay, so you can devise your own definition, and your own definition is as important as the definition of scholars that we are reading. Okay, because like these are the concepts, these are essentially contested concepts which govern our lives. And since everyone, like as a democratic principle, not as a democratic regime, like as a principle, should be equal, okay, in producing their own ideas on how to devise a collective life together. So your conception of what democracy is as important as the conception of someone who is a like very leading scholar of democratization at Harvard. Okay, so this is important because like the commonly agreed definition of democracy actually shapes everything, shapes like what we expect out of this system, how we evaluate this system, how we participate in this system. Okay, and actually how we define what is the like antonym of this system. Let's say if your definition of democracy actually puts so much emphasis on, let's say, the enjoyment of individual economic rights, then you will find, let's say, much redistributive, much social democratic, like even socialist systems as anti-democratic. But let's say on the other hand, if your definition of democracy puts much more emphasis on, let's say, the enjoyment of, or actually like perpetuation of national identity, like as a homogeneous collectivity, then you can see like multicultural population as threat to your democratic authority. So these concepts are very foundational, very contested, and we should be aware of how contested they are in order to put our own ideas into this contestation to refashion our collective life. Okay, which is important. So this issue is contested. Please think about what democracy is, how you define democracy, what your definition implies with regards to what you expect out of this system. Okay, and like which other actors or policies or parties or political movements that you see as threats to your own definition of democracy. Okay, this is not a matter of memorizing a textbook definition. This is a matter of organizing the collective life as political agents. Okay, it's important. So after like briefly discussing what democracy means and why is it important to define democracy, now actually like you may all know the scholar like Aaron Leipers. Actually, he came up with a broadly like discussed like true classification or classification of democracy or democracy's primary orientations as institutional collages. Okay, so these orientations are like majoritarian democracy and consensus democracy. Okay, I will now describe what these orientations are. So in majoritarian democracy, actually the rules like institutional designs, like electoral systems, like government types, I will like expand these terms later on, like the relationship between executive and legislative, administrative units, unitary or federal, the relationship between judiciary and executive and legislative, blah, blah, blah. So these rules are designed in a way to give the power to one single actor. Okay. So let's say this actor actually more or less can like follow their own political agendas. Okay. They don't need to get the consent or confirmation of like as the executive, they don't need to get the confirmation of legislative or judiciary bodies. Okay, these are important bodies in the division of power, but in some systems, executive authority have like utmost power over these other like political units, like institutions. Okay, like these things will make more sense later. So these majoritarian democracies, these specific like institutional design actually puts emphasis on efficiency. Okay, so if one executive power can follow their political agenda more or less easily or relatively easily through consensus democracies, then this system is efficient in the sense that it takes less time for the executive authority to enact a law, to like make a policy change. Okay, it's important. Also, this system is putting emphasis on accountability, right? Which simply means that since everyone knows who is the main boss, sorry, not boss, in the room, who has the most power, it is very visible. It is directly the executive authority, like prime minister, like president, blah, blah, blah. So we can help them accountable because we know who had the capacity to perform better than what they have been delivering. Okay, we can easily pinpoint this actor. Also, this system puts emphasis on the quality of leadership, decisive leadership. So the role of this individual executive authority, like prime minister, is very important because since they are more or less governing in a institutionally powerful manner. Okay, in consensus democracies, however, we are talking about exactly different or opposite like system or orientation. In consensus democracies, the power is distributed among political parties and among political actors like executive, legislative, and judiciary. So since the system focuses on the distribution of power, this system is actually attempting to maximize representation. Okay, representation simply means that the broader segments of the constituency or voters or society will have a say in how the government policies are determined. So if there is a, let's say, coalition in the government, like which reflects the votes of, let's say, 70% of the population, then we can take this system as much more representative, as a single party government relying on the plurality of, let's say, 30% of the votes, okay? So the system focuses on the representation, and since the system is designed deliberately to promote the distribution of power, it simply means that there will be more than one actors involved in policy-making processes, and the alliance, like collaboration, like coalition between these actors is key in this system, okay? It's an important issue. So now let's describe and discuss some of the criterion that we can decide whether a system is majoritarian or consensus, okay? So let's say government type. There are actually 3 different government types, like parliamentary, presidential, semi-presidential, okay? So we will be using the examples of 4 countries, like Germany, US, UK, and France. So Germany, for example, it's a parliamentary democracy. And in Germany, it's also a consensus democracy, because the German government most of the time is like made up of grand coalition between social democrats and conservatives, okay, conservative democrats. So the system generally doesn't allow a powerful like chancellor of Germany. Most of the time they are elected like by the parliament through the formation of party coalitions. So this is a close to a consensus democracy. In Great Britain, in United Kingdom, however, it's a majoritarian democracy, because in Great Britain, the prime minister, except for very rare cases in history, it is a single government, single party government, okay? They have mostly, like in US, they have Labour Party, okay? And they have like kind of like the Conservative Party. And one of these parties generally like form the single party government. And there is no like powerful judicial authority or Supreme Court. And legislative body, since they are electing prime minister, and since there is mostly just 2 parties, one party willingly, like inevitably, will form the majority in the legislative body, and the head, like the chair of this party, will be the prime minister. So in the legislative body, this prime minister will already see their fellows, who in many cases will agree the policies and political agenda of this prime minister, okay? So they are very powerful. But in US, for example, as a presidential democracy, US is, think about it, much closer to consensus democracy. Why? Because in US, there's an executive body, like president, but there's also a legislative body, actually a bicameral legislative body, Congress, like House and Senate. Sometimes, like one party achieves majority in the House and the other party achieves majority in the Senate, or let's say Republicans achieve majority in the Congress, whereas the Democrats could elect their presidential candidates. So we cannot talk about a guarantee like government or guarantee governing bodies coming from the same political parties, okay? Then the system requires collaboration, coalition, and consensus. So this is the first type, government type. In France, on the other hand, it's a semi-presidential democracy, which simply means that just like in US, they are electing their presidents directly, kind of through a public vote, but they also, unlike US, they have a prime minister who was selected through the parliament, okay? So since they have both prime ministers and presidents, they are like kind of in between parliamentary and presidential system. So this is why we call them semi-presidential systems. Another rule, Or another criterion. What's that? Electoral system, which is very important, friends. This is a very mechanical process. So there are two broad electoral systems, like majoritarian again, or proportional electoral system. Proportional electoral system simply mean that if a political party receives, let's say, 30% of the votes, then they will have, like, their members, like representatives, deputies, will make up around 30, more or less 30% of legislative bodies. Okay. Let's say if they have 70% of the votes, which happens very rarely, then they would get around 70% of the political power. Which simply means that in a given electoral district, if let's say there are 5 positions, like 5 seats, 5 representatives to be elected, so these seats will be allocated based on the vote proportion of these political parties. Let's say if you get 40%, then more or less you will get like 2 out of these 5 representative seats. But in majoritarian electoral systems, like if a party achieves to receive the highest percentage or number of votes, then they will automatically get all the seats from this electoral region or district, which simply means that, let's assume in Massachusetts there are 2 senators. Okay, I don't know how many like House members you have, but when election happens, if let's say Democrats receives 50% plus 1% of the votes, they will have all the House members from this state, okay, elected. If this was a, let's say, like proportional democracy, then Democrats and Republicans would have around equal number of representatives if they get like around 50% of the vote. Okay. So why is it important? This is so much important, friends, because majoritarian democracies or majoritarian electoral systems like lead to the emergence of 2 parties. Okay, because the smaller parties actually they feel the existential need to be integrated into broader party. Because let's say if you are the party of gender equality, or let's say animal rights, what percent of the votes can you get? 5%, 10%, 15%? Would that be enough to achieve to get highest percentage of the votes? No. Then these smaller parties generally are, let's say, like consumed, like they are eaten, like integrated into broader parties. Okay, so majority electoral systems generally like unfold to the emergence of 2 contending parties. In proportional democracies, however, like these smaller parties, they don't need to integrate themselves into broader parties, right? But if they get 10% of the votes, then they can just get 10% of the representatives, which is still an important like opportunity for them, an important power in legislative, but they can still like negotiate there as the party of animal rights, or let's say pirate parties in like some parts of Europe. So proportional electoral system allows that to happen. Some other criterion, let's say judiciary, their impact on executive or legislative bodies, which is very important. Let's say in US, like everybody knows that there's a very strong Supreme Court, right? So they need to give their consent on the constitutionality of any bill or law enacted. If they say that no, this is unconstitutional, then you can no way like legalize this political change, which is kind of the same in Germany. Okay, they also have a very powerful Supreme Court. And why Germany has a powerful Supreme Court? Because German constitution is like inspired, like written under the influence of American forces at that time after Second World War. And they want to write a very rigid constitution and institute a very powerful Supreme Court in order to prevent the emergence of any Nazi-like party. Okay, it's important. In United Kingdom, on the other hand, there is not a written, rigid constitution, okay? And like they have like kind of like these upper judicial bodies, but their interpretations or their decisions of legality or constitutionality is not as important as it is in the United States. So it is much flexible and less powerful in, let's say, like UK. So in that sense, UK is close to majoritarian system, whereas US is close to consensus democracy. Because in US, the president should also convince the Supreme Court, or Congress should also convince the Supreme Court. They need to like coalesce. They need to arrive at a consensus on a particular topic so that it will be legalized. So these are some criterions that we can use to like categorize like existing political systems around the ideal types of majoritarian versus consensus democracies. Okay, so thanks so much for listening. Enjoy your day.